So let us look at the advanced Apex topics. So far we have seen what is Apex programming. We have seen how to write Apex code, how to write SOQL, DMLs, how to overcome governor limits. Then we also seen how to write triggers, then controllers, custom and extension controllers, how to write it in the class. All that we have seen so far. And we also seen how to write test class. Now let's move on to some. Let's look at some features of Apex and we also seen the integration. After this, what we will do now is we will look at some advanced features of Apex that we can leverage for our development. Okay, this is on a case to case basis, but let's look at some of the features for offered by advanced Apex. So some of the key features is async Apex. You can do bulk processing. You can implement the batchable interface. Now, if you want to, like, if you know, like, we had a limit of 20,000, 10,000 SOQL records to be featured. Now, suppose you want to create batch jobs and you want to fetch data. So you can use up to 50 million records. You can use using batch Apex. Okay. So you can do bulk processing. You can implement something called as a batchable interface. Then you have a start, execute, finish method. Basically, executes in batches of 200. The initial query locator that is defined in your start method can return up to 50 million records. Each time your batch Apex class execute is called, it constitutes a new transaction. So that governor limit is reset, and this means that if you need to query up to 50,000 records each time, that the execute method is called. So basically, each batch Apex invocation creates a async Apex job record. Basically, batch Apex, when you write batch Apex, it will not create a sync job. It will create a async job. That is, it will run in the background, queue in the background, and then when it is ready, when resources are available, it will run. Okay. So you can also retrieve the async Apex job. You can schedule it, stop it, you can restart it. All of the things you can do within async Apex. Okay. So let's take a look at the batch Apex that I'm the first feature that we are talking about. So basically, you'll write a batch Apex this way. You'll write a global class, and it contains and it implements a database batchable, which takes a S object as a parameter. Okay. So when you implement this batchable, you'll have to implement three methods. Whenever you implement an interface in any object oriented, you'll have to implement the method. So in this, there are three methods: start, execute, and finish. So basically, batch Apex it will implement database batchable object, and in that, what happens is you'll have three methods implemented: start, execute, and finish. The start runs once and finish runs once at the start and the finish as it is mentioned. The execute will run for all the records in the query. Like say for example, first you say global database.query locator start and you say database fetchable context. These are the parameters that you need to pass. If you remember, we had used the database class. So here we use it for here we use the database method and parameters a bit more. Okay, so we'll use the database.query locator and pass the query to it. Now if you want to run a big query up to 50 million records, you can pass a query. Database.get query locator will handle that. Okay, now what will happen is this: you'll have to build the query in your start and it will pass this to the database.get query locator. Now once it is passed to the database, that this execute will this execute method will run for in batches of 200. Now if you have 1000 records in this query, it will create 5 threads and it will run parallelly or whenever the resources are available. It will create threads of 200 each, records each, and execute it. Okay, so that's what happens. So let's understand this: select id comma first name last name from contact and say database.get query locator. When we do a global.execute, this query gets passed over here. Okay, and the result of this query will come in this scope. It takes in a parameter execute, and the scope will basically whatever query is executed, this query will be 200 records from this query will be passed for each and every batch. Okay, suppose there are more than 200 records, first batch will can take the first 200 records and it will you can do any processing on top of it. Okay, so contact.scope. Now scope, like for example, it is typecasted as the list of contacts, so you can now you can do any DML that you want, any changes that you want, and you can do any DML. So this is going to work on 200 records. Okay. Now what will happen is, if get query locator contains 1000 records, then it will first send the first 200 records, then 200 records, then 3 and 200, like that 5 times this will execute. So execute runs for 200 records at a time. Okay. Whatever is the, if you, for even if you say past 50 million, it will break it up into 200 batch of 200. Okay. The maximum batch size you can set is up to 2000. And finally, when you want to do any cleanup job, you can this database dot finish will run. This last will run. So let's understand the elements here. So again, I'll repeat here. Bulk processing implements the batchable interface, as you can see here, and it takes three methods: start, finish, execute. Runs in batches of 200. The initial query locator is defined in your start, can return up to 50 million. Now, each time your batch apex execute method is called, it constitutes a new transaction. The limit is reset. Okay. So you query up to 50,000 records each time the execute method is called. This is another thing. So up to 50,000 records can be queried in each of the execute calls. And of course, this will also create a async apex job ID. Basically, it will create a batch job, and it will create an ID for it, which you can query for it and schedule it or delete it. You can do it that way. So right now, how to execute this batch apex is this way. Now, if you don't like, for example, if you don't schedule this, what you will do is you will call the batch contact, like any class. You call the batch contact update here, and then you will say database dot, again you use the database dot execute batch. But if you want to schedule this, what you will do is you will create another class which will implement the schedulable interface. Okay. Now the schedulable interface has got only one method called as execute. It contains only one method called execute, and it will execute the scheduler. It takes in the schedulable context, any business logic that you want to do, and then what you do is instantiate the class batch object, batch apex class here, and execute that batch. Okay. When you execute this, this will get scheduled over here. Now further logic on the schedule, how to schedule this is, you can do a system dot schedule. When you say like, if you want to schedule this one, now this class, if you want batch schedule update, this has to be scheduled from the developer console anonymous block. So how do you do that? Now look at this. Now this class, I'll schedule this class. Within this class, what's happening? I'm implementing schedulable execute, and I am instantiating the batch. Now regarding this parameters here, schedule context, this is something which are like hard coded. Okay, you have to take this exact template. The things you can change are the query and the processing logic within that. Rest of the thing is, it is database batchable interface. These parameters cannot be changed. Okay. So now you created the batch job, then you created a scheduler class. Within the schedule class, you're basically instantiating the batch job class and executing the batch job. You're saying b 200 the batch size. But now how to execute this batch schedule? So this batch schedule itself, you need to instantiate it in the developer console, and then you say string 052 star star. Now this is exactly like, system.schedule batch schedule SCHE. And what does this mean is, this is star star. This is the typical scheduler syntax. Like, you want to run it every 5 days or every 5. Yeah, we'll go through this scheduler syntax later. Okay, basically this is where you schedule the timing of it. So finally what you do is you say system.schedule, and in that you give one scheduler class and say this is the schedule mechanism for it, that this is how frequently it should run, and then you pass the variable over here. So basically it's this first you give the job name, which is the schedule, and then you pass you pass the cron expression, and then you pass the schedulable object, and then you give it a name, so it will create a batch job. Okay. So basically what this does is, batch apex is used for processing 50 million records or up to 50 million records. That is within Salesforce. Now this does not connect externally. Okay. So if you want to query from, like, say you have imported millions of records from an external system and into one staging object, and you want to move it to some processing, or you want to do some bulk processing on cases, leads or something, then you can do this. Alright. So let's look at this change here, how to work over here. Now let me just create a batch class. So all this, if you notice, are apex classes. Okay. So what we will do is, we will give a apex syntax batch fx1, call it, we will suffix the accounts with called as batch. We say underscore batch. Okay, so this you need to make global class batch fx implements schedulable, batch or batchable. Let's remember, see the syntax a minute. Database dot batchable. Pass the s object account. Okay, now this needs, you need to pass the parameters. Okay, so it implements this data type, and these are like generics. It's a generic data type, and then now what happens is you need to, now it is going to say must implement the system. So now there is no mechanism by which you can, like in Java, you can implement it automatically. You'll have to implement it per class. So global database query locator is the return. Let's do one thing. Let's copy this. So let me implement these three methods here. So what I'm going to do here is, let me change this a bit. So first I'm implementing global.database query locator start database batchable context BC. Okay, so it takes the parameter database.batchable context. So this is, now Salesforce injects this, like the Apex pages.standard controller. Salesforce will inject this into this parameter, and now you can write a query. Now I'm going to change this to name. Okay, name from account. Now with this, you return the database.query locator. Query is a string parameter. Okay, and then we'll also return, now the second method is, it takes two parameters, database batchable again, and list what it is returning from the query. So I'm returning a list of account. So this data type I will change. I'll say account, I'll just say a.name a.name plus. Okay, so I'm going to give it like batch updated. So basically it's going to fetch the records here, going to pass it to the query locator, then it will execute. Okay, in batches of 200. If it is less than 200, only one thread will execute. Okay, and now what we will do here is, we'll say, so alright, so this is the batch job completed. So what we are doing is, we are updating the list here, so we don't run into any governor limits here. So now this batch is completed. So one of the ways to now execute this batch is going here straightforward and saying here fs1 equals to, so now I'm going to create this, and database dot execute batch. I can just run this straightforward. Now here, please understand here, now I'm not going to schedule this, I'm just saying execute this. So let's see what happens. So I have this class, so it's going to query and update. Okay, so let's run this. So it runs in the background. Now since we don't have so many records, it is completed fast here. Okay, it's also it has completed. Yeah, it's running in the background. So let's wait for the thing to get completed. So if you see here, update has failed over. records got updated, maybe some validation error. So it has gone ahead and made the changes here. So now let's look at the accounts. Let's go to the accounts object. The update is not done again, so let's see why is it like that. I think what has happened is, let us use the database.update here. If you remember, the database.update will what? Even if it fails, I think few records have failed for some particular validation rule or something, which we have introduced as part of the training, right? So let's save this. So now it will go ahead even if some of the batch. If you remember this database.update, it will take a list. Even if any particular records fail, the rest of the things will go ahead. So now we need to execute this batch apex. So we have instantiated. Let's execute this again. Let's go here and let's see if there are some changes. So now if you see, now it has updated. See the batch update. The ones which have failed, it's not updated. But the rest of the ones, if you see, the suffix has been added, batch update. Okay, so this is how it works here. Also, as we continue here, let's take a look at the cron expression we saw, which we passed to the scheduler, right? So now if you want to schedule this, what you'll have to do is you'll have to, we already seen how to batch to run a normal batch apex. But if you want to schedule it, you'll have to implement this class, and what we did in anonymous block, you'll have to put this inside this one, okay? And then pass the parameter here. It will do the same thing. Now instead of calling it from anonymous block, you'll basically call it from the scheduler. You'll basically call it from the schedule and you'll do execute batch, okay? And then the final scheduling, you will schedule it from the developer console, where you will give the cron expression. So you'll have to, sorry, that was about cron jobs. Just come back here. So the expression that you pass if you want to schedule it is, if you want to run the class every day at 1 p.m., you schedule it in the time format. Now if you give it this way, what it means is the last day. This is the various types of syntax. Okay, then you can also specify the Monday to Friday at 1 a.m. at 10 a.m. every day if you want it to run at 2. So basically you'll have to say, like, at 8 p.m. you'll give the time. The third parameter is the time, and every day if you say, like, it is the second last parameter, and for the year is the last parameter. Okay, so these are some of the cron expression. You can see some more details in the Salesforce, so don't get so confused about this. Basically learn how to schedule it. If at all you come across a situation where you have to schedule, you can use this. Okay, so this part you can just take a look here. You don't need to actually do it, because you just have to write another class to implement schedulable, and then execute the same batch apex you have to schedule and call it from same. Instead of calling the batch apex, you will call the batch scheduler, and you'll pass this system